Hello there, my friends. Here we are once more, for the final part of this ghastly tale that we've been doing for, it feels like about a week now, doesn't it? I've had more time off than on. I apologise for that, but at the moment, I'm sort of letting the viewers catch up to the content. I think I've been overproducing, so I may well slow things down a little, but don't you worry, Sir Arthur is not retiring just yet. No, you don't escape me that easily. But I have begun this tale, and so I will conclude it. You will remember, perhaps, if you're one of the few who have been watching it so far, that we were exploring the system of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether. I believe that's the right way around, yes. And we had our hero was visiting an insane asylum somewhere in rural France and was being entertained at dinner by the very, very eccentric behaviour of some of the individuals contained therein. Just before we left it at the end of the last telling, there was a great commotion from without the room, a commotion which made everybody grow quite pale and concerned. Let's see what it all means, shall we? The System of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether by Edgar Allan Poe, Part 3. A mere bagatelle, said Monsieur Maillard. We are used to these things and care really very little about them. The lunatics every now and then get up a howl in concert, one starting another, as is sometimes the case with a bevy of dogs at night. It occasionally happens, however, that the concerto yells are succeeded by a simultaneous effort in breaking loose, when, of course, some little danger is to be apprehended. And how many have you in charge? At present we have no more than 10 altogether. Principally females, I presume? Oh, no! No, every one of them men, and stout fellows, too, I can tell you. Oh, indeed. I have always understood that the majority of lunatics were of the gentler sex. Well, it is generally so, but not always. Some time ago, there were about 27 patients here, and of that number, no less than 18 were women. But lately, matters have changed very much, as you see. Yes, have changed very much, as you see, here interrupted the gentleman who had broken the shins of Mademoiselle Laplace. Yes, changed very much, as you see, changed in the whole company at once. Hold your tongues, every one of you, said my host in a great rage, whereupon the whole company maintained a dead silence for nearly a minute. Now, as for one lady, she obeyed Monsieur Maillard to the letter, and thrusting out her tongue, which was an excessively long one, held it resignedly in both hands until the end of the entertainment. And this gentlewoman, said I to Monsieur Maillard, bending over and addressing him in a whisper, this good lady who has just spoken and gave us the cock-a-doodle-doo, she, I presume, is, harmless? Quite harmless, eh? Harmless? Ejaculated he in unfeigned surprise. Why, what can you mean? Well, only slightly, touched, I said, touching my head. I take it for granted that she is not particularly, not dangerously affected, eh? Mon Dieu! What is it that you imagine? This lady, my particular old friend, Madame Joyeuse, is as absolutely sane as myself. She has her little eccentricities, to be sure, but then, well, you know, all old women, all very old women are more or less eccentric. To be sure, said I, to be sure. And then the rest of these, ladies and gentlemen, are my friends and keepers," interrupted Monsieur Maillard, drawing himself up with a halter. "My very good friends and assistants." "What? All of them?" I asked. The women and all?" "Assuredly," he said. "We could not do it all without the women. They are the best lunatic nurses in the world. They have a way of their own, you know. Their bright eyes have a marvellous effect. Something like the fascination of the snake, you know." "To be sure," said I, "to be sure. They they behave a little odd. Eh? They are a little queer. Eh? You know, don't you think so?" "Odd? Queer? Why, do you really think so? We are not very prudish, to be sure, here in the South. Do pretty much as we please. Enjoy life and all that sort of thing, you know." Oh, to be sure," said I. To be sure. "And then perhaps this Claude Vougeot is a little heady, you know, a little strong, you understand, eh?" "Oh, to be sure," said I. "Yes, to be sure. But by the by, monsieur, did I understand you to say that the system you have adopted in place of the celebrated soothing system was one of rigorous severity?" "Oh, by no means. Our confinement is necessary close, but the treatment, the medical treatment, I mean, is rather agreeable to the patients than otherwise." And the new system is one of your own invention?" "Well, not altogether. Some portions of it are referable to Professor Tarr, of whom you have necessarily heard, and again there are modifications in my plan which I am happy to acknowledge as belonging of right to the celebrated Fether, with whom, if I mistake not, you have the honour of an intimate acquaintance." "Well, I'm quite ashamed to confess," I replied, "that I have never even heard the names of either gentleman before." "Good heavens!" ejaculated my host, drawing back in his chair abruptly and uplifting his hand. "I surely do not hear you right. You did not intend to say, that you have never heard either of the learned Dr. Tarr or of the celebrated Professor Fether?" "Well, I'm forced to acknowledge my ignorance," I replied, "but should be held above all things. Nevertheless, I feel humbled to the dust not to be acquainted with the works of these, no doubt, extraordinary men. I will seek out their writings forthwith and peruse them with delicate care, Monsieur Maillard. You have really, I must confess it, you have really made me ashamed of myself." And that was the fact. "Say no more, my good young friend," he said kindly, pressing my hand. "Now join me in a glass of Sauterne." And we drank. The company followed our example without stint. They chatted, they jested, they laughed, they perpetrated 1,000 absurdities. The fiddles shrieked, the drum rowdy-dowed, the trombones bellowed like so many brazened bulls of Phalaris, and the whole scene, growing gradually worse and worse as the wines gained ascendancy, became at length a sort of pandemonium. In the meantime, Monsieur Maillard and myself, with some bottles of Sauterne and Vougeot between us, continued our conversations at the top of the voice. A word spoken in ordinary keys stood no more chance of being heard than of the voice of a fish at the bottom of Niagara Falls. And sir," said I, screaming in his ear, you mentioned something before dinner about the danger incurred in the old system of soothing. How is that?" "Yes," he replied, "there was occasionally very great danger indeed. There is no accounting for the caprices of madmen, and in my opinion, as well as in that of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether, it is never safe to permit them to run at large unattended. A lunatic may be soothed, as it is called, for a time, but in the end he is apt to become obstreperous. His cunning, too, is proverbial and great. If he has a project in view, he conceals his design with a marvellous wisdom, and the dexterity with which he counterfeits sanity presents to the metaphysician one of the most singular problems in the study of mind. When a madman appears thoroughly sane, indeed, it is high time to put him in a straitjacket. But the danger, my dear sir, of which you were speaking, in your own experience during your control of the house, have you had practical reason to think liberty hazardous in the case of a lunatic? Here, in my own experience, why, I may say yes. For example, no very long while ago, a singular circumstance occurred in this very house. The soothing system, as you know, was then in operation, and the patients were at large. They behaved remarkably well, especially so. Anyone of sense might have thought that some devilish scheme was brewing from that particular fact that the fellows behaved so remarkably well. And sure enough, one fine morning the keepers found themselves pinioned, hand and foot, and thrown into the cells, where they were attended as if they were the lunatics, by the lunatics themselves, who had usurped the offices of the keepers. You don't tell me so. I never heard of anything so absurd in my life. A fact. It all came to pass by means of a stupid fellow, a lunatic, who by some means had taken it into his head that he had invented a better system of government than any ever heard of before. A lunatic government, I mean. He wished to give his invention a trial, I suppose, and so he persuaded the rest of the patients to join him in a conspiracy for the overthrow of the reigning powers. And he really succeeded. No doubt of it. The keepers and kept were soon made to exchange places. Not that exactly, either, for the madman had been free, but the keepers were shut up in cells forthwith, and treated, I am sorry to say, in a very cavalier manner. But I presume a counter-revolution was soon effected. This condition of things could not have long existed. The country people in that neighbourhood, the visitors coming to see the establishment, would have given the alarm. And there you are out. The head rebel was too cunning for that. He admitted no visitors at all, with the exception one day of a very stupid young gentleman of whom he had no reason to be afraid. He let him in to see the place just by way of variety, to have a little fun with him. As soon as he had gammoned him sufficiently, he let him out and sent him about his business. And how long then did the madman reign? Oh, a very long time indeed. A month, certainly. How much longer, I can't precisely say. In the meantime, the lunatics had a jolly season of it, that you may swear. They doffed their own shabby clothes, and made free with the family wardrobe and jewels. The cellars of the chateau were well stocked with wine, and these madmen are just the devils that know how to drink it. They lived well, I can tell you. And, uh, and the treatment. What was the particular species of treatment which the leader of the rebels put into operation? Why, as for that, a madman is not necessarily a fool, as I have already observed, and it is in my honest opinion that his treatment was a much better treatment than that which it superseded. It was a very capital system indeed. Simple, neat, no trouble at all. In fact, it was delicious. It was here my host's observations were cut short by another series of yells of the same character as those which had previously disconcerted us. This time, however, they seemed to proceed from persons rapidly approaching. "Gracious heavens!" I ejaculated. "The lunatics most have undoubtedly broken loose." "I very much fear it is so," replied Monsieur Maillard, now becoming excessively pale. He had scarcely finished his sentence before loud shouts and imprecations were heard beneath the windows, and immediately afterward it became evident that some of the persons outside were endeavouring to gain entrance into the room. The door was beaten with what appeared to be a sledgehammer, and the shutters were wrenched and shaken from prodigious violence. A scene of the most terrible confusion ensued. Monsieur Maillard, to my excessive astonishment, threw himself under the sideboard. I had expected more resolution at his hands. The members of the orchestra, who for the last 15 minutes had been seemingly too much intoxicated to do duty, now sprang all at once to their feet and to their instruments, and scrambling upon their table, broke out with one accord into Yankee Doodle, which they performed, if not exactly in tune, at least with an energy superhuman during the whole of the uproar. Meantime, upon the main dining table, among the bottles and glasses, leapt the gentleman who, with such difficulty, had been restrained from leaping before. As soon as he fairly settled himself, he commenced an oration, which no doubt was a very capital one, if only it could have been heard. At the same moment, the man with the teetotum predilection set himself to spinning about the apartment with immense energy, with his arms outstretched at right angles to his body, so that he had all of the free air of a teetotum, in fact, and knocked everybody down who happened to get in his way. And now, hearing an incredible popping and fizzing of champagne, I discovered at length that it proceeded from the person who performed the bottle of that delicate drink during dinner. And again, the frogman croaked as if the salvation of his very soul depended upon every note that he uttered. And in the midst of all this, the continuous braying of a donkey arose over all. As for my old friend, Madame Joyeuse, I really could have wept for the poor lady. She appeared so terribly perplexed. All she did, however, was to stand up in a corner by the fireplace and sing out incessantly at the top of her voice, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" And now came the climax, the catastrophe of the drama, and no resistance beyond whooping and yelling and cock-a-doodling was offered to the encroachments of the party without. The 10 windows were very speedily and almost simultaneously broken in. But I shall never forget the emotions of wonder and horror with what I gazed, when, leaping through those windows and down among the melee, fighting, stamping, scratching and howling, there rushed a perfect army of what I took to be chimpanzees, orangutans, or big black baboons from the Cape of Good Hope. I received a terrible beating, after which I rolled under a sofa and lay still. After lying there for some 15 minutes, however, during which time I listened with all my ears to what was going on in the room, I came to some satisfactory denouement of this tragedy. Monsieur Maillard, it appeared, in giving me the account of the lunatic who had excited his fellows to rebellion, had been merely relating his own exploits. This gentleman had indeed, some 2 or 3 years before, been the superintendent of this establishment, but grew crazy himself, and so became a patient. This fact was unknown to the travelling companion who had introduced me. The keepers, 10 in number, having been suddenly overpowered, devoured were first well tarred, and then carefully feathered, and then shut up in underground cells. They had been so imprisoned for more than a month, during which period Monsieur Maillard had generously allowed them not only the tar and feathers which constituted his system, but some bread and an abundance of water. The latter was pumped upon them daily. At length, one escaping through a sewer gave freedom to the rest. The soothing system, with important modifications, had been resumed at the chateau, yet I cannot help agreeing with Monsieur Maillard that his own treatment was a very capital one of its kind. As he justly observed, it was simple, neat, and gave no trouble at all, not the least. I have only to add that, although I have searched every library in Europe for the works of Dr. Tarr and Professor Fether, I have up to the present day utterly failed in my endeavours to procure a copy. Well, there we have it, my friends, the conclusion of the story. 3 parts to a story spread over 5 days. How terribly lax of me, what can I say? But I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. As I said in the very beginning all those days ago, a particular favourite of mine, and what a bloody idiot that hero of the story was. Never mind, there's no accounting for stupidity, or in fact, lunacy, it would appear. I will see you next time I present one of these tales. Maybe tomorrow, maybe thereafter. Depends what I can be bothered with, really, doesn't it?